We begin with breaking news. President Donald Trump says the U.S. will lower trade tariffs on China from 57% to 47% after his meeting with China's Xi Jinping. President Xi confirming what he called a consensus on trade, urged more follow-up talks in the near future. The two leaders held talks in South Korea and discussed a wide range of issues. After the meeting, Trump said Washington had agreed to reduce tariffs, and in exchange, Beijing had promised to resume U.S. soybean purchases, keep rare earths exports flowing, and crack down on the illicit trade in fentanyl. It was the first face-to-face meeting between Trump and Xi since 2019. All right, let's bring in our correspondent, Rik Glauert, who's in Gyeongju in South Korea. Rik, Trump said that the meeting with Xi was, quote, amazing. What would you say is the top line to have emerged from it?
Well, Trump has been speaking very enthusiastically about the meeting. He gave it a 12 out of 10. The top line, of course, is that trade war is now under a truce, that they've taken some major measures on the areas that they were disputing about to de-escalate tensions. So that's areas like the tariffs. Trump said that he's going to drop the tariffs after Xi Jinping made some commitments to, coming up against the fentanyl crisis. That's like controlling some of the precursor materials from being exported from China. Trump said that China also agreed to more agricultural imports, and he also mentioned that he had put Xi Jinping in touch with NVIDIA, the chip designer, for China to get its hands on more chips. And of course, the big news is those rare earths. Trump said that was going to be a word that we no longer needed to use in our vocabulary. Of course, China threatening to put controls on those rare earths that are used in everyday tech, from your smartphone, electrical vehicles and weapon systems. We also got some news in from Xi Jinping. He's also talked to Chinese state media. He said that USA and China must avoid a vicious cycle of retaliation, and that trade should be the ballast stone for keeping their relationship stable. So the top line is that they've had a very successful meeting by both accounts, and that the trade war for now is at a truce. They did say that they will be going back to these issues on a yearly basis.
So a top line on trade, we're also talking about access to chips, access to rare earths, and potentially purchase of soybeans. What about control of TikTok? That was a big ticket item heading into these talks. What was the discussion on that?
Well, a few days ago, running up to these talks, Trump did say that him and Xi could sign a deal on TikTok today, but based on both of the leaders' comments so far, we haven't seen that they've made any movement on that. But the comments from both leaders have been quite positive, that they agree on most things.
Right, so nothing much on TikTok, and also nothing much when it comes to Taiwan. And I ask this because you are primarily based in Taipei, and President Trump said that Taiwan never even came up in his talks with President Xi. How will that news be received in Taipei?
I should think that will be received well in Taipei. Taiwan will be breathing a sigh of relief. There was a bit of anticipation, a bit of worry around how Taiwan would come up in these talks. Taiwan is, of course, claimed by China, and Chinese President Xi Jinping has made it clear that he wants to take control of the self-ruled democracy. And there's a bit of lack of trust over Trump. We know he's a very transactional politician, and some people in Taiwan were worried that Taiwan could be used as a bargaining chip or be on the table when the US and China had these trade talks. But Taiwan's foreign ministry throughout this process have been saying that the US-Taiwan relationship is stable.
Now you're in Gyeongju, Rik, and that is where the APEC meeting is going to be held. President Xi is going to be attending this meeting, but President Trump is on his way home. Of course, APEC comprises countries from Southeast Asia and also Pacific nations. Leaders from these countries or representatives from these countries will be present at the meeting. What is Xi Jinping going to be saying to them, given that President Trump was in some of these countries just a few days back?
Yes, Xi Jinping will have a big message to the countries around Asia and Southeast Asia that China is still an economic powerhouse and that it can have strong and beneficial relationships with countries in this region. There has been some concern, particularly in Southeast Asia, that as China's economy stops growing as quickly, that it has less to offer countries here. But we can expect Xi Jinping to be using words about mutual benefit, about cooperation, suggesting that everyone can grow together with China as a powerhouse. And that's different from the kind of transactional message that Donald Trump has been giving in this region.
One other element to emerge from the meeting between Trump and President Xi was some sort of an agreement to work with China together on the war in Ukraine. Do we have any more details about what that kind of cooperation will look like?
So speaking on Air Force One, Donald Trump said that they spoke for a very long time on the war in Ukraine. He said, let's see if we can get something together. He says we're going to work together on Ukraine. And he also mentioned, of course, the fact that China buys a lot of Russian oil, and that is, in effect, quite important for Russia in funding its war effort. So no details on a framework or how that might work, but mentioned it as a key talking point between the two countries by Donald Trump.
All right, Rik, stay with us because just ahead of this meeting between Xi and Trump, Donald Trump announced the resumption of U.S. nuclear weapons testing. And this is what he posted on the Truth Social platform. And I quote, "Because of other countries' testing programs, I have instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis, and that process will begin immediately." Now, Trump also spoke about it later on Air Force One.
Others, they seem to all be nuclear testing.
Russia?
We have more nuclear weapons than anybody. We don't do testing. We've halted it many years ago. But with others doing testing, I think it's appropriate that we do also.
Rik, what do you make of this statement from Donald Trump?
I think it's really interesting timing that this came out just before he went into the meeting with Xi. Trump, of course, there saying that both Russia and China do have a lot of nuclear weapons and that China is looking to outpace others. I think it's really interesting that this trip for Trump, of course, the focus has been on trade. It's an economic trip. Trump has been talking at many points about the investment he's bringing into his country and about the growth that he's brought the American economy. But underlying that, there's also been a message of security. And even yesterday, he was talking about how economic security was similar to national security. And the mention of nuclear weapons will be watched closely in a place like South Korea. That's a country that has a defense treaty with the US and relies on the US nuclear umbrella for some of its, deterrence against North Korea.
We'll leave it there for the moment. DW's Rik Glauert in Gyeongju. Thanks so much.